Hi, I got two words for you. Interface. Actually, is that one word? Is it hyphenated? I don't know. Anyway, it's a relevant word because today we're talking about the Blender user interface. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce a website to you. It's really important for the Blender community. It's called blenderartists.org. Blender Artists is the largest Blender user forum out there. The main categories include art, coding, the game engine, and other support topics. The site has been around since 2004 and is currently managed by the good folks at CG Cookie, who have basically let the community decide the shape of things. Blender Artists features some of the best artwork made with Blender, and it's pretty cool how willing people are to share their process and other tips or answer questions you have, no matter how silly you think they might be. If you are struggling with a project or you need inspiration, Blender Artists is a great community full of good advice, inspiration, and yes, friendship. So check it out and then roll the logo. Oh, fine, I'll do it. You know, sometimes I feel like I have to do everything myself. You'll recall our last topic was called Getting Started, in which we learned the where and the how of getting Blender on your computer. In that topic, we downloaded, installed, and ran Blender for the first time. Obviously, you'll need to have done this to follow along with this lesson, which will actually see us using Blender. You ready, Padawan? We turn now to the specifics of the Blender user interface, or as I like to say, the UI. You'll learn the pieces of the UI, how to arrange the layout of the windows, how to save your files effectively, and of course, we still have the final challenge. The goal is to become familiar with the UI, personalize it, and save our changes properly. Also, I'm about to hit you with a preemptive strike. This is the segment in which I warn you about a future problem you may encounter. Blender is a constantly evolving program. The interface is bound to change since the time of this recording when the version is 2.76b. But it's okay if things move. The more important part is knowing the names of the things you see and their purposes. Now, if you find the interface is dramatically different from what I'm describing here, please check the description of this video in case an updated video has been released. Okay, dear? Okay, all has been said, so I think we're ready to start, beginning with user interface parts. When we open Blender and click outside the splash screen, we are met with the default scene of a cube, a camera, and a lamp, which by now you've seen before. What you may not know is what each of the various sections of the UI are called and the role they play. Essentially, when we break down the interface into chunks, the biggest of these are the editors. The editors, sometimes called windows, each contain unique tools that help to create your vision. Blender's default layout contains exactly 5 editors, and they are separated by bold frames. The biggest and most notable editor is the 3D view. It's where the majority of the things you'll do within Blender take place, hence its size. Directly above this is the info editor. This functions as the main menu, in which you open and save files like other programs. We'll discuss this further in the last part. Below the 3D view is the timeline editor. It's used in animations and simulations as a kind of playback device. In the bottom right corner is what's called the properties editor. This contains a lot of settings or properties for the objects in your project, like the cube and lamp. You can tweak those from here. Finally, above the properties editor is the outliner. This editor is basically a list of the various items in your scene. The cube is one. Blender calls these items data blocks, but more on that later. By the way, I mentioned that Blender users often say editor and window interchangeably, but at How to Blend we're going to stick on using the word editor for consistency. Also, most Blender users drop the editor altogether, just so you know, and I'll do that occasionally too. Now, every editor has its own assortment of menus, buttons, and panels, but one common element that they all share is a header. The header is a horizontal bar similar to a toolbar, which appears at the top or bottom of the editor. Among other things, it contains the editor type menu. It's this menu that enables you to switch the editor to a different one. Left-clicking this menu reveals the existence of over 15, wow, distinct editors that can be swapped out for your current one. You don't lose any work you're trying to do by changing editors either. Everything will be there if you switch back. There are a few other interface elements we should also discuss. These include regions. Each editor contains a main region, which is the biggest visible part of the editor, and it can't be hidden, unlike the headers. There are also smaller regions within the editors. For example, the tool shelf that shows in the 3D view is a region. These provide tool shortcuts and information, and can be hidden if you want by dragging on the frames. Context buttons. These are essentially tabs and they reveal more options. The Properties editor makes good use of these. Panels. These are collapsible spaces indicated by down or right-facing arrows. For example, these ones in the Properties editor. They add some very needed organization to the editor's plethora of settings and options. And lastly, we have controls. The smallest elements visually, these let you modify functions, options, and values in Blender. Controls come in several forms like buttons, toggles, sliders, and menus. Remember, at How to Blend we end each part with a challenge to give you a chance to practice what you've learned. In this case, the task is simply this: study the images and identify the parts. You've seen the interfaces divided into windows called editors. Each has a header and an assortment of contexts, panels, regions, and controls. Now study this image for a moment. Can you identify each of the highlighted parts? I recommend saying it out loud. Often speaking a phrase helps you to better remember it. Look at this image. It's taken from another editor type called the UV image editor. What parts are these? Finally, can you guess these parts in the user preference editor? The answers will appear in a couple seconds. Click through to the next video after you've checked.